You think 47 people can do anything to me? I'll take every one of you down and still walk out with the company. He said it with a smile like he'd already bought his ticket to Tuscany. I sat there in the conference room, the fluorescent lights humming, my hands folded around a lukewarm paper cup of coffee, and felt like someone had punched a hole in my chest. He, Graham Lang, our CEO, stretched his hand across the table and said almost conversationally, "I'm going to take you for everything you've got." Then he winked at the VP and walked out as if he'd just closed a deal. But I had no idea what I was about to discover. Have you ever been told you were expendable while still clocking in overtime to keep the lights on? Would you believe me if I told you that a company with an $847 million valuation had an HR department that treated people like expendable widgets? Drop your answer in the comments. This is not some anonymous internet rant. This is a story about a toxic boss who turned a promising Seattle startup into a pressure cooker of fear, and how 47 of us, 47, ended up filing a class action lawsuit that went public and blew the whole thing wide open. It started small, little comments in meetings, a hand on a shoulder that lingered too long. "You're too stupid to even see what's coming," he'd whisper in my ear during a review. Like it was a charming joke. "By Christmas, I'll be sipping champagne in Tuscany with your money," he boasted at the holiday party, his Armani suit glinting under the fairy lights. Anyone who's worked under someone like that knows those first jokes are the first red flags. I remember thinking, "This is stressful, but I can handle it," I told my coworker Janelle one night. She looked at me with the kind of exhausted sympathy only people who had been gaslit get. "Dude, she's literally counting your money before the divorce is even filed," she'd said. Except in our case, it was a boss counting our hours like cash. But the hostility became intentional. Performance reviews swapped out constructive feedback for public humiliation. Private Slack DMs were forwarded to the exec team with sarcastic comments. People were scheduled on last-minute weekend sprints and then accused of being not committed. HR would schedule coaching sessions that turned into veiled threats. "If you don't bend, we will break the boat and make sure you fall out." I still have the audio. I have the screenshots if you don't believe me. One night, after yet another restructuring email that killed the security of our team, I sat at my kitchen table and scrolled through the company's Slack history. There was a file named March Layoff Strategy. It was timestamped at 2:12 a.m. and showed a list of names, people we'd trusted. 47 names. 47 faces I knew. 47 people who had either been forced out, had fled, or were barely holding on. I printed it. My hands were shaking as I slid the papers into an envelope. I remember thinking, this can't be real. This can't be legal. But then I found the spreadsheet. "What is this?" I asked Janelle, handing her the printouts at 7 a.m. in the break room. There was coffee on her sleeve, mascara smudged from too many late nights. It lists sick days, reliability scores, even pregnancy notes. It says treatment plan next to names like their dossiers. "That's HR," she said flatly. "That's how they ghost you out." "Ghost you out?" I echoed. "Like how?" "Documentation," she said. "They build a paper trail to make it look like all the terminations were justified. It's sophisticated. They'll claim performance reviews. They'll claim culture fit. 2 micro cliffhangers. I thought this was isolated, but I had no idea who else would step forward. Little did I know, there were people keeping notes. I started to collect pieces. Deleted Slack threads recovered from an old teammate's backup. Screenshots of emails where Graham had used coded language. Reduction of force that meant remove women of a certain age, and a Ring doorbell clip from the office lobby showing Graham yelling at a woman who'd been at the company 8 years because she asked to be reasonable about parental leave. You won't believe what I found next. A private Google Drive folder labeled Retention Strategy FY22 that contained annotated performance metrics with red, green places, and black markers. Red meant disposable. Black meant payoff candidate. It was clinical. It read like a surgeon deciding who to keep and who to cut. There were names, pictures, salary numbers, and an internal note. We can pressure them legally. Preempt arrives with NDAs and attrition bonuses. That's when the anger turned into something colder. I remember saying out loud, "That's when I knew." He didn't just want a lean company. He wanted absolute control. My voice didn't tremble the way it used to. I wasn't angry anymore. I was methodical. I'm not going to lie. Revenge, in the sense of exposure and justice, tasted a little like relief. But we were up against a mountain. Graham owned charm with investors. He was a man who'd once walked into a room and had two angels throw millions at him. He had PR teams, lawyers, and a board that liked the numbers his ruthless style produced. If you asked any VC, they'd say, "Numbers don't lie." They ignored the human cost. We needed help. "Call a lawyer," Janelle said. "Call Margaret Chen. She's the employment attorney I used to text. She did something similar in Bellevue last year." Margaret answered on the third ring in that calm voice that means trouble for the other side. "Show me everything," she said. "Do not delete anything, do not forward anything on company systems, and stop talking about it on Slack." So we stopped. We moved to private messages. We started an encrypted group chat. We signed NDAs with each other. We saved emails to personal drives. We had to be careful. The first setback came fast. Setback 1. Our IT admin was fired overnight. One minute, he was in our Slack channel making jokes about the new coffee machine. The next, his account was gone and all his backups were wiped. We lost a week of data. I felt like we'd been punched. "They found out," someone whispered. Setback 2. Our lead witness, a calm, detail-oriented product manager named Raj, was offered a cushy role at a competitor. He'd disappeared during crucial discovery because someone had called him with promises and stock options. He thought, for a second, he could stay safe. We felt abandoned. Setback 3. The PR team leaked an internal memo painting the company as being under a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled ex-employees who want to tank a promising company. The board did nothing. The investors publicly tweeted support for Graham. He posted a smiling family photo on Instagram with the caption, "Hard work pays off. Protect the dream." Have you ever had a plan that looks great on paper and collapses in the face of cash and charm? Would you have kept going? But then a twist. One of those disposable employees, Maya, who'd been in customer success, had been quietly collecting receipts. She'd been saving pay stubs, screenshots, and crucially, had been recording phone calls with HR where they coerced her into signing a severance with a confidentiality clause. They pressured me. She told me when we met in a dim cafe off Pike Place. They said, "Sign or we'll make sure the layoffs look performance-based." I felt like I was being extorted. She handed me a thumb drive. "There are 14 recorded calls," she said, and I left them in a folder titled My Insurance. The discovery process in the legal world is ugly and messy and slow, but it's where the truth lives. Margaret filed suit. We didn't start as 47. We started as 5. But the suit, once filed in King County Superior Court, was a sour light in the dark. It let others join. People came out of the woodwork. "How many?" I asked Margaret, voice barely above a whisper. "How many names do we need to make this class?" 47 will do, she said. "You need enough plaintiffs to show a pattern. Right now you have patterns: discriminatory firing, retaliation, and wage theft. This might be bigger than we thought." I remember counting those names like a rosary. 47. The number felt both ridiculous and righteous. We prepped depositions. We subpoenaed Slack archives. We had IT forensics dig into backups. Those are the heroes no one hears about until the end. They reconstructed deleted threads, recovered Google Drive files, and flagged a suspicious series of consulting invoices that funneled cash to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The amount? $1.2 million over 2 years disguised as contractor fees. Fancy dinner bills, private flights, lavish team retreats that landed in personal accounts. How did they think they'd get away with that? My friend Tom asked when I showed him the invoices. Do they know what Discovery does? Apparently they didn't, I said. We had a PR strategy, but we were careful. Margaret insisted we keep the suit quiet until the docs were airtight. She said public opinion matters, but it must be backed by evidence. She filed motions to preserve data and got an order to prevent anyone from destroying files. Graham's camp filed a counter-motion to dismiss, calling us malicious quitters with axes to grind. Little did they know, the court ordered a mandatory mediation, and in the months of discovery, the plaintiff files grew thicker. People wanted to join. Some were scared. Some were grateful to see someone make a stand. A former HR director, who'd been pushed out the year before, came forward with explosive testimony. She had an email chain where Graham said, "We can't be soft on people. It ruins the culture. Clean house." "He's on record," Margaret said, breathless. "We have emails and messages where he basically instructs HR to punish employees who ask too many questions." "That's the smoking gun," I said, feeling a brittle kind of joy. The media smelled it. TechCrunch got a tip. A freelancer from The Stranger called. We didn't want a sensational splash that would let Graham control the narrative, but the reporters were persistent. "Are you going public with this?" one asked. "Are you ready for the chaos? Are you ready for what? To go to war with a man who can hire the best PR and legal minds?" I asked him back. "What did you expect? Peaceful fairness? Have you ever had to choose between staying safe and doing the right thing?" The day the class action went public, the company headquarters looked like a fortress. Cameras were lined outside. Photos of Graham appeared on every tech site with headlines like "Startup in Turmoil." Some articles were sympathetic to him. Others were brutal. Social media did what it does. Pile on, then mull, then divide. Inside, the atmosphere split. Some employees were furious that we had outed the company. Others were relieved that the truth had a megaphone. Investors called the board. There were emergency meetings where the CFO played with his pen and refused to meet our eyes. The board announced an independent investigation. Graham did an interview where he said, "I love my company. This is political. It's a smear campaign." "You're painting yourself as a victim," one of our plaintiffs said over coffee. He's good at that. The hearing was the kind of scene that makes your heart hammer so hard you can hear it in your teeth. Depositions were dramatic. People testified about being sexually harassed, about being told to fake performance numbers, about being coerced into unpaid overtime, about being demoted after maternity leaves. Graham's testimony was chillingly arrogant. In one deposition, he said, "You're too emotional. Business isn't a charity." In another, he said, "They'll never take my company from me." He had the exact lines, "He'll never figure it out. He's completely clueless," he'd once said to an investor about anyone who questioned him. The words were recorded and played back in court with deadpan precision. "According to this disclosure, your net worth is?" the judge asked one day, flipping a folder. Graham leaned forward, an expression of cultivated surprise on his face. "My net worth is substantial, Your Honor." The judge said a smaller, pointed question. "According to these invoices," she said, "there are transfers that appear to benefit certain personal accounts. Can you explain these?" Graham's face, normally a mask of charisma, flashed. For the first time, he didn't have a pat line ready. He stammered. "Those were for contractors. We hired talent." Margaret leaned into the microphone, voice calm as a blade. "Your Honor, we have bank records, contractor agreements, and travel receipts showing personal expenses paid for by corporate funds. We also have Slack messages where Mr. Lang orders employees to make the metrics say yes." "That's fraud," someone in the gallery whispered. The words echoed. What happened next felt like those satisfying parts of a thriller where the villain's power turns to powder. The board, pressured by investors, asked Graham to step aside while the investigation proceeded. He refused at first. Then, when several major investors told the press they wouldn't back the round if he stayed, he gave a resignation statement that read like a poorly edited apology. "I made mistakes," he wrote, "but never with malice." Malice or not, the class action didn't settle quietly. The discovery releases were brutal. HR manuals with redline sections that encouraged selective enforcement were exposed. Performance review templates with scoring adjustments were leaked. And our final crushing blow, an internal email with the subject line Attrition Plan Q4 that listed 47 employees and had hand-typed the line. Expect attrition to look like performance exits. Maintain plausible deniability. Graham's empire of plausible deniability crumbled into reasonable doubt, then into proof. At mediation, the numbers were astonishing. The company offered a settlement with six-figure payouts, a multi-million-dollar fund for affected employees, public reforms to HR, new independent oversight, and covering legal fees. 70% of class members accepted. The total? $12 million to distribute among 47 employees, plus a court-approved monitoring body. Would you have taken the settlement? Would you have wanted him convicted or merely removed? Tell me in the comments. He didn't go to jail. Corporate malfeasance rarely leads to cell time unless the prosecutors get involved. We were a civil suit. But the settlement came with a public admission of wrongdoing and a binding agreement that Graham would not be allowed to be an officer of any public company for 5 years. For a man who loved the stage more than the product, that was a kind of exile. And then the human stuff. People healed in different ways. Some took their payouts and used them for therapy. 1. Family reunited after ruined finances were repaired. Another plaintiff used the money to start an advocacy group for tech employees called Workers' Worth that now provides legal counsel pro bono. As for me, I stayed to testify, resigned with dignity, and used the settlement to go back to school, night classes in labor law, because I wanted to help people figure out their options before they hit rock bottom. I met a woman at a hearing, Sarah, who's now my partner. She used to be a deposition coordinator, and she laughed at how my hands shook when I first read Graham's messages. "You orchestrated a movement," she told me. "You're not the same scared person." 6 months later, Graham's LinkedIn said, "Taking time for personal projects." I saw him once in Bellevue, walking past a boutique that sold the kind of suits he used to wear. He looked smaller. He wasn't sipping champagne in Tuscany. He was shopping for a jacket with a hand that used to be used to wave off accusations. What did I learn? Power without accountability becomes monstrous. Systems matter. The legal process is slow and messy and imperfect, but it works when people provide evidence and when they band together. We didn't get revenge in a movie sense. We got something better, the chance to make a company change its behavior, the closure of public acknowledgement, and protections for future employees. Have you ever stayed silent because you were afraid? What would it take for you to speak up? Tell me below. I still have the Slack printouts I printed that first week, the thumb drive from Maya, and the court documents that are now public record. If you want proof, you can look them up. They're filed under Lang versus Meridian Tech, King County Superior Court, case number 2247831. Some people think we went too far. Some think we didn't do enough. Was I wrong to involve the press? Was I wrong to pursue a settlement instead of a longer fight? Tell me I'm not crazy for what I did next. I used the settlement money to sponsor workshops for HR professionals on ethical termination. And I started a small consulting practice that helps startups design humane people systems. Was that petty? Maybe. Was it effective? The data says yes. 10 companies we advised showed a 60% reduction in voluntary turnover the next year. That's a number I bring up at speaking gigs just to annoy the old board. What would you have done if you'd been on that Slack channel after the attrition plan email? Would you have kept quiet for fear of losing your job? Or would you have printed everything out like I did? Have you ever been part of a class action? Would you join one? One last thing. This wasn't a story about a single bad apple. It was about boards that reward results without asking how they were achieved, investors who ignore human costs, and HR systems that exist to shield executives. If you want to change corporate culture, the lever isn't just whistleblowers. It's regulators, it's conscientious investors, and it's the people who say no when they see a wrong. So, what would you do in my shoes? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories of justice served, of toxic people being held to account, subscribe and hit that bell. I've got dozens more like this one, each with receipts and courtroom documents. Some people say I went too far. Others call me a hero. For me, it was never about heroics. It was about 47 people who said they were sick of being disposable, and who, together, proved that even a man in an Armani suit can't make everyone else small.